Patient, based on the readings Ranking Humankind and Science and Prejudice from the Facing History, Race and Membership in American History, the Eugenics Movement textbook. First, I'd like to establish what is happening at this time in our history. The Age of Enlightenment begins in the 1600s, 1700s, sparking a scientific revolution. People are thinking about how the world is ordered. They're beginning to name things, categorize things, sort things into different groups. Also, this Age of Enlightenment and scientific revolution begins to focus on the age of reason, like using reason, using science, analyzing things, breaking things down to understand things better. The first person in our history that I want to talk about is Carolus Linnaeus. The name may sound familiar to you. He's the guy who first created the nomenclature that we use now in biology to name things, the taxonomy of things. He was the one who came up with kingdom, class, order, family, genus, and species. Subsequently, there have been changes to his order, but the first incarnation of this nomenclature is his thinking. So we have Carolus Linnaeus to thank for that. Now, Carolus Linnaeus thought that everything began through the hands of God. He was very religious. He believed in Adam and Eve, and therefore he believed that human beings started with Adam and Eve, and even way down to the very beginning, every animal and plant shared the same ancestors at their root. In his work, he divided the human species into 4 groupings. He called them European, African, American, and Asiatic. Because he was a man of God, he was very pious. He believed in the monogenesis of things, that everything came from the same root. That he believed that even though there were 4 different groups of people, that they were more alike than different. The next man of the Enlightenment, the next scientist that I'd like to introduce, is Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. He kind of continued the work of Carolus Linnaeus, but in his thinking, there were 5 groups. They're really like geography-based groups. So we have the Negro, based in Africa, the Mongolian, based in Asia, the Malay, who are from Southeast Asia, the American Indian, and the Caucasian. In fact, it's Johann Friedrich Blumenbach that we can attribute the word Caucasian to. He was the first to introduce it. Now, being a man of Europe, he considered the Caucasians the first human beings. Think of Adam and Eve. And he also considered the Caucasians the most beautiful of all people. In his words, the other races were degenerations from the original type. If you think what a degenerate is, it means that someone or something is not as good as the original. Now we go on to a scientist named Petrus Camper. He was an artist who then became a professor of anatomy. And he's famous for introducing this notion of facial angles that first appeared in a textbook. He is Dutch from Holland, and at the time, the Dutch were involved in the slave trade, though it's recorded that Petrus Camper personally was opposed to slavery. Like Carolus Linnaeus, like Blumenbach, Petrus Camper was also very religious, pious, faithful, and believed in monogenesis, again, Adam and Eve. One contribution that he made to this order of beings is he believed that an organism's outer state, so how it appeared on the outside, reflected its inner state, meaning its moral character or intelligence. Again, being a man from Europe, he considered the Roman and Grecian civilizations to be the closest to perfection. And so he compared everything to the ancient Greeks and Romans. Being a scientist, what he did was he measured Greek and Roman statues and different angles that the nose and the eyes and the brows shaped. He also did the same with monkeys, apes, and skulls, or this monkey and ape skulls and human skulls from all different races. The thing that he did, though, was he compared them against the Greek and Roman statues. And he ordered these skulls into what became known as the chain of being. And you'll see here that we have an ape face and an ape skull, and there's a progression all the way to the Greek or Roman perfection or ideal. This is a Caucasian face and a Caucasian skull. Notice that it's next to the Greek and Roman statue. You would think that it wouldn't be surprising that a Caucasian or European skull would look similar or be similar to the Greek or Roman ideal, given that the Greeks and Romans were European, and of course, they'd make statues similar to their own face. But bias, stereotypes, right, ignorance, got in the way of Petrus Camper's work. Then we cross the ocean to the United States. This is a man by the name of Samuel Morton, Dr. Samuel Morton, in fact. Unlike the previous gentleman, Linnaeus, Blumenbach, Camper from Europe, Samuel Morton didn't believe in monogenesis. He didn't believe that there was just Adam and Eve, for example. He believed in polygenesis, meaning that different groups began spontaneously. He also didn't feel that race can be blurred, right? There wasn't a gradation between people, but instead he thought, if you're Caucasian, you're Caucasian. If you're African, you're African, etc., etc. Now, this is a man who had 2 medical degrees. He was a professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He served as the president of the Academy of Natural Sciences, making him like the top American scientist in his time. In fact, you'll see the New York Tribune commented that there is probably no scientific man in America who enjoyed a higher reputation among scholars throughout the world. Throughout. So he was a very well-respected man. His contribution to race science, he predicted that intelligence was linked to brain size. If your brain was bigger, then you were smarter. So what he tried to do is he tried to rank the races according to skull size. And so he did measurements of skull capacity or brain capacity using skulls. In his research, he concluded that Caucasians or whites have larger skulls than other races, and therefore it can be assumed that they were more intellectual and superior. We'll see in a later lesson how his own experiments were flawed. Now, through his research, he published his results in a book called Crania Americana in 1839. And in this book, he used his findings on skull size and his anthropological studies, and he described the different races. For example, I'll just read it from the textbook. I put some quotes on this slide here, but I'll read it verbatim from the textbook. So the Europeans, the Caucasian race. The Caucasian race is characterized by a naturally fair skin, susceptible of every tint, hair fine, long and curling, and of various colors. The skull is large and oval, and its anterior portion full and elevated. The face is small in proportion to the head, of an oval form with well-proportioned features. This race is distinguished for the facility with which it attains the highest intellectual endowments. The spontaneous fertility of the Caucasus has rendered it the hive of many nations, which, extending their migrations in every direction, have peopled the finest portions of the earth, and given birth to its fairest inhabitants. Now notice the actual words that he chooses to describe Europeans or Caucasians. Let's compare that to how he describes, for example, the Asian race. Again, I'm going to read straight from the textbook. Asians. This great division of the human species is characterized by a sallow or olive-toned skin, which appears to be drawn tight over the bones of the face, long black straight hair, and thin beard. The nose is broad and short, the eyes are small, black, and obliquely placed, and the eyebrows are arched and linear, the lips are turned, the cheekbones broad and flat. In their intellectual character, the Mongolians are ingenious, imitative, and highly susceptible of cultivation, in other words, learning. So versatile are their feelings and actions that they have been compared to the monkey race, whose attention is perpetually changing from one object to another. Again, think about the words that he uses to describe the Europeans or Caucasians, and the kind of words he chooses to use to describe Asians. Now let's see how he describes Native Americans, also known as the American race. The American race is marked by a brown complexion, long, black, lank hair, and deficient beard. The eyes are black and deep set, the brow low, the cheekbones high, the nose large and aquiline, the mouth large, and the lips tumid, swollen, and compressed. In their mental character, the Americans are averse to cultivation, in other words, learning, and slow in acquiring knowledge, restless, vengeful, and fond of war, and wholly destitute of maritime adventure, meaning they don't sail on the water. But I guess if there's no ocean nearby, why would you need to? But that's just my comment. Continuing, they are crafty, sensual, ungrateful, obstinate, and unfeeling, and much of their affection for their children may be traced to purely selfish motives. They devour the most disgusting foods, uncooked and uncleaned, and seem to have no idea beyond providing for the present moment. Their mental faculties, from infancy to old age, present a continued childhood. Indians are not only averse to the restraints of education, but for the most part are incapable of a continued process of reasoning on abstract subjects. Last, for Samuel Morton, let me share how he described Africans. Characterized by a black complexion and black woolly hair, the eyes are large and prominent, the nose broad and flat, the lips thick, and the mouth wide. The head is long and narrow, the forehead low, the cheekbones prominent, the jaws protruding, and the chin small. In disposition, the Negro is joyous, flexible, and indolent. While the many nations which compose this race present a singular diversity of intellectual character, meaning there are a range of intelligences, of which the far extreme is the lowest grade of humanity. So there may be smart people amongst Africans, but they also represent the least intelligent. Continuing, the moral and intellectual character of the Africans is widely different in different nations. The Negroes are proverbially fond of their amusements, in which they engage with great exuberance of spirit, and a day of toil is with them no bar to a night of revelry. Like most other barbarous nations, their institutions are not infrequently characterized by superstition and cruelty. They appear to be fond of warlike enterprises and are not deficient in personal courage, meaning they're very courageous. But once overcome, they yield to their destiny and accommodate themselves with amazing facility to every change of circumstance. This is a direct reference to slavery. So once they have been overpowered, taken, they accept their lot in life as a slave. Continuing, the Negroes have little invention, meaning they're not creative, but strong powers of imitation, so that they readily acquire mechanic arts. They have a great talent for music, and all their external senses are remarkably acute. So you see, while he does have some good things to say, a lot of it has a negative connotation, whereas the words that he used for describing the Caucasian race or the white race, just totally positive connotations the whole way through. Now, Samuel Morton and his teachings had very significant consequences. For example, one of his best students was a professor by the name of Louis Agassiz from Harvard University. Now, he taught in his courses at Harvard University, for example, that Africans were a separate species, right? The polygenesis theory. What is most significant with Louis Agassiz however, is that because he was the Harvard University professor and a very well-established, well-respected Harvard University professor, he trained virtually all the prominent U.S. professors in natural history, so anthropology, sociology, during the second half of the 19th century. So he spread this teaching of these people are not the same as white people, and so there are consequences, and I'm sure you can make connections to that. For example, here we have the argument that Native Americans and African Americans aren't truly citizens of the world. Like, for example, they do in the United States, we have something called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But people who believed in what Samuel Morton and Louis Agassiz preached were convinced that the African Americans and the Native Americans did not deserve the same rights as white Americans. So the Bill of Rights and the Constitution does not apply. Therefore, it's an argument to legalize and keep legalizing slavery and the forced removal of Native Americans from their ancestral lands. So you see that this kind of twisted race science, even though it may not have been overtly racial, like there were, I don't think Samuel Morton or Louis Agassiz was trying to be unfair, for example, to people of color. But they insisted, and they tried to use science, for example, measuring the skulls, to back up their hypotheses. However, because there's this underlying what's the word I'm looking for? This underlying thinking that people are different, some people are better than others, that it kind of influenced, it infected the way that they did things. And again, you'll see in a later lesson how even though Samuel Morton had probably the best intentions, his beliefs kind of tainted the way his science was undertaken. So anyway, that's it for now. If you have any questions, please approach me in class. Goodbye.